Look at the people around you for a second. One person is tall, another is short. One has very dark skin, another has very light skin. Some people can live comfortably thousands of meters above sea level, while others struggle to breathe there. Some people can drink milk their entire lives, while others get sick from a glass. Some people turn bright red after one drink, while others barely react. We are all human. We share almost all of the same DNA. So why do we look and function so differently? What happened to our species? And how could the same human body become so different in only tens of thousands of years? Around 70,000 years ago, humans living in Africa already carried enormous genetic diversity. Then, groups of humans began moving into completely different environments. Some crossed deserts, some followed coastlines, and others crossed mountains and forests. They didn't know what was waiting ahead. They were simply following food, water, and places where they could survive. At first, their bodies were not dramatically different, but every new environment presented a different problem, and natural selection began favoring different solutions. The same human body was being pushed in different directions. Imagine living on the African savanna, where temperatures can approach 40 degrees Celsius and shade is limited. Getting rid of excess heat becomes extremely important. A tall, slender body with relatively long limbs has more surface area through which heat can escape. It's almost like turning the body into a biological radiator. Animals show the same basic principle. Desert foxes tend to have larger ears than Arctic foxes because large ears help release heat, while smaller ears reduce heat loss. The environment doesn't care what a body is supposed to look like. It favors whatever works. Now move into the dense rainforests of Central Africa. The problem changes completely. The vegetation is thick, humidity can be extremely high, and moving silently through the forest is very different from crossing an open savanna. A smaller, compact body can make movement through dense vegetation easier, and when humidity is extremely high, sweat doesn't evaporate efficiently, so the advantages of a tall body for releasing heat can change. Same continent, same species, different environment, different pressures. Over many generations, those pressures can leave visible marks on the human body. But the strangest differences aren't always visible. Go up to around 4,000 meters above sea level, and the problem becomes oxygen. The air contains much less usable oxygen than it does near sea level. People who aren't adapted can experience headaches, dizziness, severe altitude sickness, and in extreme cases, death. Yet humans have lived at these elevations for thousands of years. And here's where evolution gets incredible. People living in the Andes and people living on the Tibetan Plateau faced almost the same problem, but they didn't solve it in the same way. Some high-altitude Andean populations developed larger chests and lungs and tend to have higher hemoglobin levels, increasing the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity. But too many red blood cells can make blood thicker and create health costs. Tibetans took a different route. Their bodies can use oxygen efficiently without relying on the same increase in hemoglobin. One famous clue came from the EPAS1 pathway. Genetic research found an unusual high-altitude adaptation in Tibetans that is closely related to genetic material inherited from Denisovans, an ancient human relative. At some point, modern human ancestors encountered Denisovans and had children with them. Their descendants inherited genetic variants that happened to work extremely well in thin mountain air. A genetic legacy from an extinct human relative became part of the machinery helping people survive high altitude. Same problem, difference. But evolution wasn't working only in extreme environments. It was also working in something much more ordinary, your kitchen. Consider milk. Thousands of years ago, most adult humans couldn't efficiently digest fresh milk. After weaning, the body normally reduces production of lactase, the enzyme needed to digest lactose. Then, humans began domesticating cattle and other milk-producing animals. Suddenly, milk became a renewable source of calories. You didn't have to kill the animal. You could keep it alive and collect milk again and again. During difficult winters or food shortages, that could be incredibly valuable. People who could continue digesting milk as adults could gain an advantage, and over generations, lactase persistence became very common in some populations. And it didn't happen only in Europe. Some African pastoralist populations independently developed adult milk digestion using different genetic variants. Different populations reached a similar biological result because they faced a similar lifestyle, raising cattle and regularly consuming milk. So if milk makes your stomach hurt, it doesn't necessarily mean your body is broken. It may simply reflect a different evolutionary history. Alcohol gives us another strange example. When the body breaks down alcohol, it produces acetaldehyde, a toxic intermediate that must be processed further. Some genetic variants make this process less efficient, causing facial flushing, rapid heartbeat, and discomfort after drinking. These variants are particularly common in East Asian populations. Their history is complex, but they show something important. Even the way your face reacts to a drink can have a genetic story stretching back thousands of years. What your ancestors ate and drank didn't disappear into history. Some of it is still operating inside your cells today. But food and climate weren't the only forces shaping humans. Disease could be even more powerful. In the 14th century, the Black Death swept through Europe and killed an enormous proportion of the population. Entire communities were devastated, yet people exposed to the same disease did not all respond in the same way. Genetics was one part of the story. Our immune systems contain receptors that pathogens can exploit. One famous example is CCR5, which HIV can use to enter certain immune cells. A mutation called CCR5 delta 32 changes this receptor, and people who inherit two copies can have strong resistance to many strains of HIV. Scientists debate exactly how much the Black Death contributed to the frequency of this mutation, so the simple claim that the plague directly created today's frequency is too neat. But the larger lesson remains. Epidemics can change which genetic traits become more common. A genetic difference that seems unimportant under normal conditions can suddenly become valuable when a deadly disease arrives. And that's the part of human evolution we often forget. Evolution isn't trying to make humans better. It isn't trying to make one population stronger, smarter, taller, or more advanced than another. It changes populations as traits become more or less useful in particular environments. A body shape that helps in extreme heat can be less useful somewhere else. A high-altitude adaptation can be unnecessary at sea level. The ability to digest milk matters more where dairy is an important food source. Our differences are not evidence that humans became separate kinds of people. They are evidence that the same species found different ways to survive.